I'm going to be talking to you today, going in some more detail about comparative advantage. And I wanted to begin with a question that Professor Georgian already answered, but what is comparative advantage? Okay, everyone else then has a comparative disadvantage. Okay, but a lot of my lecture will be coming from Mises' treatise, Human Action. And as Mises says, this is one of the great laws of economics. It's also referred to as the Ricardian law of association. And I hope by the end of the lecture I can explain to you why this is. So we're going to be covering absolute advantage, productivity differences, and resource efficiency in trade. And obviously comparative advantage, opportunity cost, specialization, and the basis for exchange. And then I'll give you an example of comparative advantage in economic gains. So we begin with absolute advantage, and this idea was developed by the free traders of the 18th century, including Adam Smith. And the idea that countries or people should specialize in what they are best or most efficient at, and then exchange these products where people of both countries will be better off. And we covered this in the previous lecture, so I'll briefly mention this. But the question comes down to people and countries as well, of what should they produce? As advantageous as it may be for them to produce something, the question for economics in the investigation is, well, what should people produce? And who should produce what? So I'll begin now discussing division of labor, and I want to read this quote from Mises in Human Action. The fundamental social phenomenon is the division of labor and its counterpart, human cooperation. Experience teaches man that cooperative action is more efficient and productive than isolated action of self-sufficient individuals. The natural conditions determining man's life and effort are such that the division of labor increases output per unit of labor expended. So the division of labor is, and opportunity cost is really the fundamental point to understand for comparative advantage. Mises says that mechanization is the fruit of the division of labor, not its motive and fountain spring. I'll tell you, when I was in college, there was, which was, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years ago, there was this thing called Hop Wave, and it's in reference to Professor Hans-Hermann, and excerpts of his speeches, and it was laid on top of synthwave and retrowave music, and there would be like helicopter effects, because Hopley's remarked for the use of helicopters in reference, I believe, to the Chilean president who got thrown out of a helicopter. But anyways, there was this one hop wave track that I found, and it began with one of his speeches. We're talking about society, and he's saying that things like sympathy and love are not necessary for understanding society. He says that self-interest is all that's required, the idea that we prefer more over less to understanding society. And I think that idea comes from page 168 of Human Action in the last paragraph before Mises' sub-chapter 7 on the Great Society, where Mises references that society, for it to formulate, does not need these things like sympathy or love. What brings people together in the division of labor is their self-interest. And this is the foundation for society. But this really is understood through the investigation of praxeology. If you look at historians, and especially the left liberal historians, they want it to be things like love or sympathy or putting community and society over one's own individual existence in the world, that this is the reason why people come together. But I think this is not true. And I'll tell you this too, because I was thinking about this. But I was dating a girl, and she asked me, "Do you love me?" And I said, "I don't even know what love is." And then we eventually broke up, but I don't think that had anything to do with it. So, opportunity cost is really what's fundamental for understanding comparative advantage. And the natural facts determining man's life are, firstly, there's three. The innate inequality of men with regard to their ability to perform various kinds of labor. What is equality? Because I hear it all the time, especially from the liberal colleges, but what is it? There's no equality in people. Everyone's unique. We're not homogenous. We have different aptitudes, conscientiousness. In sports and arts, our abilities are demonstrated differently. People are risk averse. Some people want to do crazy things. Some people want to do different things. We have our emotions, we have our ideas, and ideas are what precede all human action. So if we have different ideas, then inherently we're different. People get sick. People have disabilities. I don't understand this concept of equality. And Rothbard has a good book, Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature. And he's saying that like this idea of equality is like it's anti-human. It reduces people to ants. That if they just are given the proper direction, then they'll stay in line and be orderly. And that's what social engineers try to do is take people from birth, put them through this system of public education where we become homogenized. Everyone has to be on the same page, learning the same thing at the same time. But if you don't lose your individuality, then you can remain, retain your creative capacities and become an entrepreneur. And I think that's why mainstream economists and economic textbooks can't discuss entrepreneurship, is because entrepreneurship is wild. It's pioneering through society, and you have to incur the profits and losses to figure out the way to go. This is not something that is capable of being contained in the mainstream economic models. The second natural fact determining man's life is the unequal distribution of the nature-given non-human opportunities of production on the surface of the earth. So even across the world, people are born in different places at different times. There's no equality across the world. Natural resources, whether you live in the mountain ranges of the Alps, or the deserts of the Saharas, or the rainforest, you're gonna have different opportunities with the resources available to you, even not only in space, but in time of technological resources. If we're born hundreds of years ago, we don't have the internet to communicate and transmit ideas across the world. But in the modern age of the time we live in, we do have this capability. I mean, we're being broadcast. I'm lecturing not only in this room, but in the rooms of the other people who are currently watching this. So, the technology and the natural resources around the world are essential elements to the division of labor and society. And it's part of the limits of what we can currently do and what yet we can do. Thirdly, there are undertakings whose accomplishment exceeds the forces of a single man and requires the joint effort of several. Some forms of labor which no single man can accomplish without the help of others, or it would take too much time and effort for one single man to accomplish. So, for example, if I want to construct a castle, because I like castles, perhaps I can do it single-handedly, but it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of effort. So it will suit my means if I can hire additional labor to help me in whatever I want to pursue. Furthermore, if I'm trying to, let's say, raise a wall, maybe my strength is incapable of lifting the wall with my pulleys and levers alone, but if I have a couple people with me, perhaps we can raise it together. Excuse me?
mind if I place for Olivia?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was thinking that my lecture right before lunch was gonna keep you guys from it, but now there's nothing stopping you. Okay, so this is a quote. The great human society enclosing all men in all of their activities did not originate from such occasional alliances. Society is much more than a passing alliance concluded for a definite purpose and ceasing as soon as its objective is realized. Even if the partners are ready to renew, it should an occasion present itself. The point here is that, and I'll not conclude now, but come back to this point, that because of society and the division of labor, we don't purely interact for the sake of our own interest, but it allows for the opportunity to arise, to establish communities and organizations and even friendships. But let's continue now into the Ricardian law of association, the law of comparative costs, which is comparative advantage. So we begin with some assumptions. Firstly, the fundamental assumption of an individual or group being more efficient in every way cooperates with an individual or a group less efficient in every way. Products can freely move from each area into the other, but not workers and the accumulated factors of future production. So, I'm going to read this quote as well. The division of labor between two such areas will, as Ricardo's law shows, increase the productivity of labor and is therefore advantageous to all concerned, even if the physical conditions of production for any commodity are more favorable in one of these two areas than in the other. It is advantageous for the better endowed area to concentrate its efforts upon the production of those commodities for which its superiority is greater, and to leave to the less endowed are the production of other goods in which its own superiority is less. So, with specialization and the division of labor, Professor Jurgen was touching upon this point, that when you do choose to specialize in something, whether you're a country or a person, your productivity will also increase over time that you work at something. And so, as your specialization increases, it will leave people behind. It will actually increase inequality in society and in the trading partners. But that's a natural effect of specialization, is that people become more productive in what they pursue over time, almost at an exponential rate. What this also implies, though, is that just because, as we mentioned, you're better at something doesn't mean that other people cannot also benefit if they engage in exchange with you. For example, the surgeon who is performing surgery can also clean his utensils for surgery, but it would be a better use of his time to specialize in surgeries and have someone else clean these utensils for him, as like a nurse or something. So with a certain specialization, it creates a deepening of not just production structures, but places for more people to enter and specialize in something else. And it happens all over the place, but it becomes so natural that it's like almost unrecognizable. But everywhere in society, this is the essence of companies, is you have like a president of a company, and you have people that work for him, and then people who specialize in the more remote tasks, but that are also fundamental to the operation of a business. For example, this hotel that we're in, if no one was supplying the coffee, then maybe we would go somewhere else. And so I think that the more people this hotel can employ, the better amenities that they can provide and offer, and the more satisfied consumers become. But this is only possible through specialization and society that allows for this. And this goes in hand with dispersed knowledge across society, which I'm going to touch upon in the next lecture. But it's important to recognize that the law of association is not some theoretical idea, but that it's occurring everywhere across society. And that's why, like, in an economic praxeological investigation, we have to discuss this concept of the law of association. Now, I'm going to give you an example that comes from Mises's Human Action, just so you can kind of see it in a numerical matter, how this law of association or comparative advantage really operates. So, I'll read this to you. If A is in such a way more efficient than B, and you can think of the A and B as either people or nations or countries, that he needs for the production of 1 unit of the commodity P, 3 hours compared with B's 5, and for the production of 1 unit of Q, 2 hours compared with B's 4, then both will gain if A confines himself to producing Q and leaves B to produce P. So we have the production of 2 goods, P and Q, and 2 people, A and B. If each of them gives 60 hours to producing P and 60 hours to producing Q, the result of A's labor is 20P plus 30Q, of B's 12P plus 15Q, and for both together, 32P plus 45Q. If, however, A confines himself to producing Q alone, he produces 60Q in 120 hours, while B, if he confines himself to producing P, produces in the same time 24P. The result of their activities is then 24P plus 60Q, which as P has for A substitution ratio of 3/2Q, and for B 1/5/4Q, signifies a larger output than 32P plus 45Q. And Mises writes, therefore it is manifest that the division of labor brings advantages to all who take part in it. Collaboration of the more talented, more able, and more industrious with the less talented, less able, and less industrious results in benefit for both. The gains derived from the division of labor are always mutual. This is one of the ideas that perhaps you've all experienced in your Econ 101 classes, is going over these ideas of absolute advantage and comparative advantage, and given probably a similar numerical example to this one. But it's, again, fundamental. And I think within the mainstream economic teaching of this idea, it's taught and briefly mentioned, but this is the fundamental conclusion of the law of comparative association, as Mises writes. The law of association makes us comprehend the tendencies which resulted in the progressive intensification of human cooperation. We conceive what incentive induced people not to consider themselves simply as rivals in a struggle for the appropriation of the limited supply of means of subsistence made available by nature. Neither are we forced to assume that the isolated individuals of primitive hordes one day pledge themselves by a contract to establish social bonds. The factor that brought about primitive society and daily works towards its progressive intensification is human action that is animated by the insight into the higher productivity of labor achieved under the division of labor. And Mises also writes that in order for people to understand the evolution of society, it can be properly and only properly understood through praxeology. Because history can't explain the evolution of society in the terms of the strengthened societal bonds of specialization. History, as Mises writes in Theory and History, is like an art for interpretation. We have these facts and these observations of what has occurred, but the way we interpret it and the way historians can retort the facts is like an art. And so, from a theory of praxeology, people are able to understand how human action, beginning with self-interest, goes into society, and how their contribution helps strengthen the societal bonds. And how it evolved from primitive ones. But I also want to mention that this term, association, is very important. And I think it really can be applied at the micro level, because usually comparative advantage, especially taught in the mainstream economics, is taught with the idea of nations trading. So it already begins with kind of a macroeconomic concept. But I think especially how this idea can benefit your lives is with the term association. Because who you associate with is really going to affect your life. I'm not married personally, but I have heard that a marriage can be heaven or hell. And as Professor Jesus Corte de Soto said, the two most important questions in your life are what are you going to do with it, and who are you going to share it with? So who you share it with is foundational to almost the environment and your own experience in your own life. You can do anything you want with your life because you live in this society with the opportunities that you have, that all the information for you to do what you want to do is available. But I think it's important to understand that also with whatever you choose to do is an opportunity cost. What are you willing to give up? And if you do what you want to do, are you able to accept not only the profits, but the potential losses of what else you could have done with your life? And I'll tell you this, I have some friends who are rock stars, for lack of a better terms. And they may have, music, celebrity status, millions of listeners, hanging out with other celebrities, people wanting to take pictures with them and whatnot. But then I see in their personal lives some of the most depressed lives I've ever seen. And they openly admit that. And so it's like, why is that? Because the people who they associate with, especially in LA, may be looking just to increase their own status or use them because they have stuff that they want, so they get used. So their associations are confined to people of similar lifestyles, which is also rock star. If they want to do drugs, they can do drugs. But this is the life that they have, in a way, constructed and chosen for themselves. And so this is also a matter of their own associations. But I want to mention that for the sense that the life you choose to live will have its cost. Every choice, it has a cost associated with it. And yeah, I think that's just very important. Is at the micro level, your choices are going to influence your life, who you choose to hang out with, what you choose to do. It is also an influential factor in the process of your life. But some critiques of the law of association is that, well, we can't just exchange with everyone, because if we rely, let's say, on another country if we engage in exchange, it's this idea of war preparedness. We can't rely on another country to produce our arms, because if we do that, say we go to war, they may cut off their production of arms for us, and this will undermine us. So you have socialists in the world, like Donald Trump, who wants to impose ideas like tariffs. And he's saying McKinley, great president, had this whole idea of imposing tariffs. So this is a great idea. But the trade-off of having tariffs and becoming more autarkic, where your own country is producing these things, there's two points to that. One is that you weaken the societal relations with other countries, because we're not trading, or decreasing the amount of trade. So then the societal bonds are weakened. They're not strengthened, because we're not trading. Secondly, if you want domestic production, production is used for what? For consumption. Now, if we produce domestically, it will be more costly than if we produced overseas. So production may increase domestically, but the cost for consumers will also increase because it's more costly. So the cost gets shifted onto consumers. So consumers are not better off if we produce everything domestically. And I guess this comes back to the question of, and I'll continue to elaborate in the next lecture, of what is society? As Mises writes, and I'll conclude with this sentence, or this paragraph from Mises. Society is not merely interaction. There is interaction, reciprocal influence between all parts of the universe, between the wolf and the sheep he devours, between the germ and the man it kills, between the falling stone and the thing upon which it falls. Society, on the other hand, always involves men acting in cooperation with other men in order to let all participants attain their own ends. So just because you may be sick or disabled does not mean there's no place for you in society. In fact, if you were sick and disabled without a society, you would probably die off. But it's only from society, it's the only means to allowing more people to exist. And yes, now I want to open the floor for some questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, so this concept of specialization, are you familiar with the middle income trap? Do you know what that is? It's a concept in developmental policy making, so like DWA kind of stuff, where the trade specialization, like when we talk about islands benefiting from making just one thing, the middle income trap is basically the idea that like the more industrious person does the harder, more industrial intense thing. Some say has resulted in places like Brazil, India, and other places being like an underclass to the people that specialize first, or the West. So what do you make of that idea that like specialization might have a ceiling if certain people specialize and then kind of lock you out of it?
I would say that, as Mises explains, we began in a state of war. And then they realized that just if I conquer in war, it's more advantageous for me, the winning party, to enslave the captors, the losers, rather than just kill them off. And then from enslavement, they realized that cooperation is more beneficial than enslaving. And so this is a process that can only be developed in society that allows for cooperation. So my point is that there is it's a very narrow perspective to look at this middle class trap?
Middle income trap.
Middle income trap. Because only through time will you allow for more development and productivity to increase the material standards of well-being for these people. If you're only looking at a certain time, then yeah, you can make the observation and conclusion that these people are stuck in this trap. But with more productivity and exchange and trade, then more people over time will be able to specialize, become more productive, and essentially find their way out of their current situation. But that only comes through industrialization and trade. There's no other way out of this middle income trap, other than by going through a society that allows for cooperation. I don't see, like, if you look at human history, it is only from industrialization that, yeah, people left the agrarian primitive life, were able to specialize more and created the interdependence in society that people are allowed to become more wealthy. And I don't know, did that answer the question?
Yeah. Basically, like, there is no choice because you have to specialize until you can do something else. No, I get you. The time aspect to it is like really important.
The time is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Because human history, over time, especially in the US, people have been poor. But we're richer now, as middle-income people, than the kings of the feudal ages. Because of our specialization in trade, because of productivity. One person can do the job of now 10, 20 with a tractor, or certain machinification. So, back to that quote that I mentioned earlier, mechanization is the fruit of the division of labor, not its motive and foundation and fountain spring. We didn't create mechanization other than the reason that it would be time saving, labor saving. It would be more productive. And this goes into the role of profits in society. That in order to make profits, you have to provide a good or a service to another person. And then you're like blowing the balloon of more wealth. And more people will be better off. In return, you accumulate more profits. And you can mechanize further. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to read more on what Mises has to say, then perhaps in Human Action and Theory and History, he elaborates that, the Austrian school, beginning with the praxeological approach, is really the only way to understand how man has gone from the primitive conditions and state of affairs to the more wealthy and sustainable ones. And it's a strengthening of society from its interdependence and specialization in economies of production. So I think this is why Mises considers the law of comparative, the law of association and comparative advantage as one of the great laws of economics. Why it's very foundational and important. But yes, I have a couple minutes left. Any questions relating to anything? Even on Zoom, if there's any questions there, I would like to answer some. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.